The air across the United States on Saturday, June 14, 2025 crackled with a potent mix of celebration dissent and a surprising policy reversal, painting a vivid picture of a nation grappling with its identity and leadership. As President Donald Trump prepared to commemorate the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary with a grand military parade in Washington, D.C., widespread No Kings protests erupted nationwide simultaneously with an unexpected and significant shift in the administration's aggressive immigration enforcement strategy. In a move that caught many by surprise, the Trump administration has abruptly altered the focus of its mass deportation campaign, instructing Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) officials to largely halt raids and arrests within the agricultural, hotel, and restaurant sectors. This directive, detailed in an internal email from senior ICE official Tatum King to Homeland Security Investigations regional leaders, explicitly stated effective today. Please hold on all worksite enforcement investigations/operations on agriculture, including aquaculture and meatpacking plants, restaurants, and operating hotels. Crucially, the guidance specified that agents were not to make arrests of non-criminal collaterals, undocumented individuals not known to have committed any crime, though investigations into human trafficking, money laundering, and drug smuggling within these industries would continue. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed the new guidance, with spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin affirming, "We will follow the president's direction and continue to work to get the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens off of America's streets." This pivot comes after months of the administration broadening its enforcement to include widespread work site raids and general sweeps, a stark contrast to initial promises to target only undocumented immigrants with criminal records. The sudden change suggests that the administration's broad immigration crackdown, a cornerstone of Mr. Trump's presidency, was indeed inflicting significant pain on industries and constituencies he cannot afford to alienate. President Trump himself acknowledged this impact on social media, stating, "Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace." This concession followed concerns raised by Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins and echoed long-standing worries from rural Republicans, as well as reflecting Mr. Trump's own decades-long ties to the hotel industry, which heavily relies on immigrant labor. The guidance arrived just as protests against immigration raids were gaining traction, notably in Los Angeles, and despite White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller's recent push for a minimum of 3,000 arrests per day. A target that had seen arrests surge to over 2,000 daily last week. ICE official Tatum King's email acknowledged the internal impact, noting, "We acknowledge that by taking this off the table that we are eliminating a significant of potential targets." Simultaneously, a wave of No Kings protests orchestrated by the 50501 movement, a national coalition aiming for 50 protests in 50 states as one movement, swept across the nation. These demonstrations, coinciding with President Trump's 79th birthday and the military parade, aimed to denounce the administration's policies, perceived authoritarian actions, and recent mass deportations. Philadelphia hosted one of the largest gatherings, with police estimating around 80,000 participants marching from Love Park to the Museum of Art in what was described as a festive and peaceful atmosphere with no arrests. Speakers included Martin Luther King III, who declared, "We still believe in a nation without kings, without tyrants, without rulers who place themselves above the law," and Representative Jamie Raskin, who directly addressed the president, asserting, "You are not our king and we are not your subjects." In New York City, an estimated 25,000 protesters, including actor Mark Ruffalo, braved the rain to march down Fifth Avenue, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Donald Trump has got to go." Ruffalo emphasized, "We're not going away. We're not going to be quiet." Similar large-scale, mostly peaceful demonstrations unfolded in Los Angeles, drawing over 20,000 people and featuring an impassioned address from Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello, and in San Diego, where more than 20,000 gathered peacefully. While organizers largely called for non-violence, with civil rights icon Dolores Huerta advising demonstrators to avoid actions that could justify brutal police force, isolated incidents marred the day. In San Francisco, A hit-and-run driver struck four No Kings protesters with law enforcement investigating it as a possible intentional act, though injuries were non-life-threatening. In DeKalb County, Georgia, police appeared to deploy tear gas on protesters, an action for which law enforcement did not immediately provide comment. Tragically, in Minnesota, a politically motivated assassination saw two state lawmakers shot, with the suspect reportedly having No Kings posters in his car, leading to the cancellation of local protests out of caution. Amidst this widespread dissent, the nation's capital prepared for the Army's 250th anniversary celebration, a military parade President Trump had long desired. Featuring 7,000 soldiers and M1 Abrams tanks, 68-ton vehicles whose presence raised concerns about potential damage to Washington streets, the parade was set to roll down Constitution Avenue, culminating in a festival concert and fireworks. Despite the festive intent, public opinion, as revealed by an NBC News Decision Desk poll, showed that nearly two-thirds of U.S. adults, 64%, opposed the use of government funds for the event, a sentiment strongly held by Democrats 88% and Independents 72%, though supported by most Republicans 65%. President Trump, who had previously warned that protesters at the parade would be met with heavy force, expressed optimism about the weather, quipping, "I hope the weather is okay, but actually if it's not, that brings you good luck." The day's events underscore the profound and often conflicting forces at play within the American political landscape. The immigration policy shift highlights the immense economic leverage of industries and the potential for public and business pressure to influence even the most entrenched political positions. It suggests a pragmatic adjustment driven by economic realities and political expediency, possibly to shore up support among key constituencies. Conversely, the nationwide No Kings protests demonstrate the enduring power of grassroots activism and collective dissent. The sheer scale of participation, particularly in major cities, signals a deep-seated opposition to the administration's policies and a perceived erosion of democratic norms. The incidents of violence, while isolated, serve as a stark reminder of the heightened tensions and the volatile undercurrents in the current political climate. The military parade, intended as a display of national strength and unity, ironically became a focal point for division, with its cost and symbolism sparking further debate and serving as a backdrop for mass demonstrations. As the day concluded, it left behind a complex tapestry of policy adaptation, fervent public expression, and ongoing national introspection, with the interplay of economic pressures, popular will, and executive power continuing to shape the nation's unfolding narrative. In a sudden and significant turn, the Trump administration has recalibrated its aggressive mass deportation campaign, issuing new directives that effectively pause most raids and arrests within the agricultural, hotel, and restaurant sectors. This unexpected pivot, revealed in an internal email from a senior Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) official and corroborated by U.S. officials, suggests a recognition that the sweeping crackdown was inflicting considerable damage upon key American industries and constituencies vital to the president's support base. The policy shift comes amidst a backdrop of escalating nationwide protests against immigration raids and a rare public acknowledgement from President Trump himself regarding the economic fallout. The directive, sent on Thursday by Tatum King, a senior ICE official within Homeland Security Investigations (HSI), explicitly instructs regional leaders to hold on all worksite enforcement investigations/operations on agriculture, including aquaculture and meat packing plants, restaurants, and operating hotels. Crucially, the email also stipulated that agents should not arrest non-criminal collaterals, individuals who are undocumented but have no known criminal record, though investigations into human trafficking, money laundering, and drug smuggling within these industries are still permitted. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed the new guidance, with spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin stating, "We will follow the president's direction and continue to work to get the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens off of America's streets." This policy adjustment marks a stark contrast to the administration's prior stance, which had recently expanded its focus beyond undocumented immigrants with criminal records to include broad worksite raids. For months, the administration, particularly under the influence of White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, had pushed for a dramatic increase in arrests, with Miller reportedly demanding a minimum of 3,000 arrests per day. This pressure had seen daily arrests surge to over 2,000 last week, with ICE conducting operations at factories, restaurants, and businesses nationwide, including well-known establishments in Washington, D.C. like Jose Andres' Jaleo, and major agricultural centers in California and a meatpacking plant in Omaha, Nebraska. The new guidance, as acknowledged by Tatum King in his email, will undoubtedly eliminate a significant of potential targets, leaving agents who had felt immense pressure for higher arrest numbers to digest the long-term implications without direct White House clarity. The catalyst for this shift appears to be mounting economic pressure and political concerns. On Thursday, President Trump took to social media acknowledging our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. This statement followed a briefing from Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, who conveyed farmers' anxieties regarding ICE enforcement's impact on their businesses. Furthermore, former administration officials noted that concerns about the agricultural industry's welfare due to immigration crackdowns had been a consistent refrain from rural Republicans throughout Trump's first term. The American Farm Bureau Federation swiftly praised Trump's comments, recognizing the vital role of farm workers in the nation's food supply. The economic ramifications of the prior aggressive enforcement were tangible and immediate. Following major raids earlier this month, Maureen McGuire, chief executive of California's Ventura County Farm Bureau, reported that anywhere from 25% to 45% of farm workers in the area had stopped coming to work. As she articulated, when our workforce is afraid fields go unharvested, packing houses fall behind in market supply chains. From local grocery stores to national retailers are affected. This impacts every American who eats. Given that California accounts for over a third of U.S. vegetables and more than 3/4 of its fruits and nuts, the potential disruption to the national food supply chain was significant. These aggressive workplace raids alongside courthouse arrests also ignited a wave of nationwide protests, particularly in Los Angeles, further amplifying the pressure on the administration. In a separate but equally significant development, on Saturday, President Trump engaged in a lengthy phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, discussing a range of pressing international issues. The leaders reportedly spent the majority of their hour-long conversation focused on the escalating tensions in the Middle East, specifically Israel's blistering attacks aimed at Iran's nuclear program and Iran's subsequent retaliatory strikes. Trump, in a Truth Social post, indicated he also pressed Putin to end Russia's war in Ukraine, stating, "He feels as do I this war in Israel-Iran should end, to which I explained his war should also end." According to Yuri Ushakov, Putin's foreign affairs advisor, the Russian president condemned the military operation against Iran, expressing serious concern about a possible escalation and its unpredictable consequences for the entire situation in the Middle East. Putin reiterated Russia's readiness to mediate and proposed steps for mutually acceptable agreements on the Iranian nuclear program, a topic which the leaders did not rule out returning to negotiations. This comes as the Russia-Iran relationship has deepened considerably since the Ukraine invasion, with Tehran supplying Moscow with drones and ballistic missiles. The planned sixth round of talks between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Iranian officials in Oman, set before Israel's Friday strikes, was subsequently cancelled. The two leaders also touched upon the ongoing prisoner exchange between Russia and Ukraine, with Putin noting the recent swap of seriously wounded and younger prisoners of war and expressing readiness for further negotiations. The call concluded on a personal note, with Putin wishing Trump a happy 79th birthday. The dramatic shift in domestic immigration policy underscores the complex interplay between political rhetoric, economic realities, and public pressure. While the immediate impact will be felt by industries reliant on immigrant labor, the long-term implications for the administration's broader immigration agenda remain to be seen, particularly if the pause does not extend to other sectors. Concurrently, the extensive dialogue between Trump and Putin highlights the global complexities facing the U.S. and the potential for high-level diplomatic engagement to shape geopolitical outcomes even as critical conflicts persist. Both developments unfolding concurrently. paint a picture of an administration navigating intricate domestic and international landscapes, constantly recalibrating its approach in response to evolving challenges and pressures. In a surprising and potentially far-reaching policy reversal, the Trump administration has signaled a significant shift in its aggressive mass deportation strategy, instructing Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) officials to largely halt raids and arrests targeting the agricultural, hotel, and restaurant industries. This abrupt pivot, detailed in an internal email obtained by the New York Times and confirmed by the Department of Homeland Security on Saturday, suggests that the administration's broad immigration crackdown has begun to inflict considerable damage on key industries and constituencies that President Trump is keen to retain. The new guidance, issued via an email from senior ICE official Tatum King to regional leaders of Homeland Security Investigations (HSI), explicitly stated, effective today, please hold on all worksite enforcement investigations/operations on agriculture, including aquaculture and meat packing plants, restaurants, and operating hotels. Crucially, King's message also clarified that agents should not make arrests of non-criminal collaterals, referring to undocumented individuals without a known criminal record. While investigations into human trafficking, money laundering, and drug smuggling within these sectors are still permitted, the directive marks a clear departure from the sweeping enforcement actions that have characterized recent months. DHS spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin affirmed the guidance, stating, "We will follow the president's direction and continue to work to get the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens off of America's streets," a subtle re-emphasis on criminal aliens after a period of broader targeting. This policy adjustment follows intense pressure, including nationwide protests against the administration's immigration raids, some specifically targeting farms and businesses. President Trump himself made a rare public acknowledgement on social media, noting, "Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace." This concession reportedly came after Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins conveyed farmers' concerns directly to the president, who himself has extensive interests in the luxury hotel sector, an industry heavily reliant on immigrant labor. The shift stands in stark contrast to previous directives, such as White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller's public push for a minimum of 3,000 arrests per day, which had seen arrests surge to over 2,000 daily in the preceding weeks. ICE officials who had been under pressure to meet arrest quotas expressed surprise at the new guidance, with King himself acknowledging that, "By taking this off the table, that we are eliminating a significant of potential targets." The long-term implications for enforcement agencies and the affected industries remain to be fully determined. Adding to the week's significant developments, nationwide protests dubbed No Kings rallies unfolded across the U.S. on Saturday, coinciding with a massive military parade in Washington, D.C. celebrating the Army's 250th birthday. These demonstrations, fueled by a range of grievances including the administration's immigration policies, underscored the deep societal divisions and public discontent simmering beneath the surface of official pronouncements. In a separate but equally newsworthy disclosure, President Trump's financial report for 2024 was released on Friday, revealing an impressive total income of at least $620 million from his various personal businesses. A notable highlight was the $57 million derived from World Liberty Financial, a crypto firm reportedly headed in part by some of his children, with the president holding nearly 16 billion governance tokens. The disclosure also detailed significant earnings from his extensive portfolio of trademark and licensing businesses, which generated $11 million, including revenue from his Save America book, Trump Watches, sneakers, fragrances, the Lee Greenwood God Bless the USA Bible, and Trump guitars. His resort and golf course empire continued to be a major income source, with Mar-a-Lago contributing over $50 million and his Doral Club leading the golf properties with more than $110 million in revenue. Meanwhile, legislative efforts on Capitol Hill continued to draw attention. Speaker Mike Johnson celebrated the House's passage of a $9.4 billion package designed to codify DOGE cuts to foreign aid and public broadcasting, hailing it as a critical step towards a more responsible and transparent government that puts the interest of the American taxpayers first. However, A new analysis from the Bipartisan Congressional Budget Office (CBO) presented a stark economic contrast, indicating that the House-passed Trump megabill would disproportionately affect lower-income households. The CBO report projected that the poorest 10% of U.S. households would see their resources reduced by approximately $1,600 per year, representing a 3.9% income cut, while households in the top 10% would experience gains of about $12,000 per year or a 2.3% income boost. This analysis highlights the diverging economic impacts of the administration's legislative agenda. As the nation navigates these complex and often contradictory developments, the implications of the immigration policy shift, coupled with ongoing protests and the economic ramifications of legislative actions, will undoubtedly shape the political landscape. The administration's balancing act between its base business interests and broader economic concerns will be closely watched, as will the unfolding impact of these policies on American society and economy in the months to come. The global landscape is currently a maelstrom of shifting geopolitical alliances, economic recalibrations, and rapidly evolving technological frontiers. From the White House's assertive trade policies and immigration crackdowns to the pervasive influence of artificial intelligence, these forces are not merely abstract headlines but tangible pressures reshaping industries, national economies, and the very fabric of daily life, particularly for younger generations navigating an increasingly complex world. At the heart of this transformation are the economic policies emanating from the Trump administration, notably the re-escalation of tariffs. President Trump recently signaled a renewed intent to impose unilateral tariff rates, threatening to send letters to trading partners within weeks declaring a take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum. This follows a 90-day pause on his most punishing duties set to expire on July 9. A deadline that has created significant market uncertainty. While Trump has spoken of a definitive deal with China pending sign-off from himself and President Xi Jinping, including resolutions on rare earth mineral exports and Chinese students in U.S. colleges, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has offered a more nuanced view, suggesting the tariff pause is highly likely to be extended for countries negotiating in good faith. The administration claims to be imposing a total of 55% tariffs on Chinese goods, a figure reportedly arrived at by combining existing and previously announced duties rather than introducing entirely new levies. These aggressive tariff policies have had a discernible impact across the global economy. Government revenue from tariffs has soared in Trump's second term, with over $22 billion collected in May alone and $92 billion since January 1. The Congressional Budget Office projects these collections could reduce the deficit by $2.8 trillion over the next decade, though this hinges on the tariffs remaining in effect. The overall effective U.S. tariff rate now stands at 15.6%, the highest since 1937. Corporates are responding strategically. An exclusive Reuters report revealed that nearly all iPhones exported by Foxconn from India between March and May went to the U.S., highlighting Apple's efforts to bypass tariffs by diversifying supply chains away from China. Similarly, furniture retailer RH experienced chaotic and unpredictable disruptions, with CEO Gary Friedman noting that the Liberation Day tariff announcements rattled supply chains, forcing the company to shift production, with 52% of its upholstered furniture projected to be made in the US and 21% in Italy by year-end. NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang explicitly stated that US chip curbs on China have forced the company to exclude the Chinese market from its forecasts. Globally, the ramifications are evident. Canada's trade-focused industries are slowing. UK goods exports to the US saw their largest monthly fall since 1997, and Japan remains cautious about the impact on its economy, particularly regarding auto tariffs. The World Bank has even slashed its global growth forecast for 2025 by 0.4 percentage points to 2.3%, citing high tariffs and uncertainty as significant headwinds. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon cautiously suggested tariffs might make a soft landing a little bit softer for the U.S. economy, though he anticipated a rise in inflation and a slight dip in employment. Concurrently, the Trump administration's intensified immigration crackdown, particularly in California through raids at restaurants, traffic stops, and routine check-ins, poses another significant economic variable. While politically popular in some quarters, economists warn that a reduction in immigration could lead to severe labor shortages and decelerate economic growth. Giovanni Perry, an economics professor at the University of California, Davis, emphasized that immigrants play a huge role in the California economy, noting that without them there would be less economic growth. Less opportunity also for local companies and American workers. Immigrants constitute roughly one-third of California's workforce, with an outsized presence in physically intensive sectors like construction 40% and agriculture, as well as care work 28% and manufacturing 44%. While critics argue immigrants lower wages for native-born citizens, Perry's 2024 working paper found no significant effect on wages for college-educated U.S.-born individuals and a positive effect for less educated American-born peers, asserting that immigrants often fill critical labor gaps. Notably, about 1.8 million people, or 17% of California's immigrants, were undocumented as of 2022, with 1.4 million lacking legal protections. Despite adding costs for public services, research consistently shows immigrants contribute more to federal revenues than they consume, with the Congressional Budget Office estimating $1.2 trillion in federal revenues from immigrants between 2024 and 2034. Undocumented immigrants alone contributed $8.5 billion in state and local taxes in 2022. The administration's past efforts to constrain immigration, even with a softened stance on agriculture and hospitality due to labor shortage concerns, historically coincided with a tight labor market, higher wages, but also slower economic growth, e.g. 2.3% in 2019, down from 2.9% in 2018. Perry cautions that a sustained tight labor market could drive up production costs and encourage imports, directly conflicting with the administration's domestic manufacturing push. Beyond economic policy, the geopolitical stage has seen a dramatic escalation, with Israel's major attack on Iran, an operation that Geopolitical Economy report asserts was made in USA. The Trump administration is portrayed not as a mere observer but as a direct participant, providing crucial intelligence and weapons, including 300 Hellfire missiles, and giving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu the green light. What were publicly framed as peace talks for a new nuclear deal with Iran were in this analysis a cynical ruse or perfect cover for the surprise attack. Trump himself boasted of his prior knowledge, stating, "I always knew the date and we knew everything," further claiming the strikes were a response to Iran's failure to make a deal within a 60-day ultimatum. His Truth Social posts, where he referred to the strikes as slaughter and threatened even more brutal future attacks, underscore the administration's aggressive posture. This direct involvement contradicts claims from officials like Marco Rubio, who stated the U.S. was not involved. The report reinforces the long-held view of Israel as an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the U.S. empire, highlighting Washington's annual billions in military aid and consistent protection in international forums, including vetoing UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. These sweeping changes are profoundly impacting the perspectives of Gen Z, a generation that has come of age amidst unprecedented global disruption. A recent New York Times focus group with 13 young Gen Zers revealed a mixed but predominantly anxious outlook, with sentiments ranging from disappointed, nervous, and sad to interested, optimistic, or cautiously optimistic. Economic anxieties are paramount. Many expressed doubts about their degrees, frustrations over the soaring cost of living, and the daunting prospect of affording a home. 9 out of 13 participants admitted to still living with family or being financially dependent on them. The job market is perceived as the worst it's ever been, with entry-level positions demanding unrealistic levels of experience, a situation some attribute to companies retaining core employees post-COVID. The pandemic's enduring social effects were also a recurring theme, with participants describing it as isolating and leading to a generation less social and more on their phones, potentially impacting gray matter. Against this backdrop, artificial intelligence emerges as both a tool and a source of apprehension for Gen Z. Many use AI daily, treating it as a new Google for in-depth analysis, script writing, or even for academic assistance, with one student admitting to using it for everything I do in school. Others, however, expressed significant concerns, describing AI as freaking me out due to a perceived lack of regulation and potential environmental impacts. There's a palpable fear that AI is already replacing entry-level jobs, exacerbating the already competitive market by sifting through applications robotically. Social media, too, presents a dichotomy, a means of connection that simultaneously fosters false competition and doom scrolling, leading to a sense of being behind and a diminishing gray matter. Despite the prevailing anxieties, a significant portion of the Gen Z participants still believe America's best days are ahead, often citing a hopeful belief in stabilization or the positive long-term effects of current policies like tariffs. Yet there is widespread skepticism about the traditional work hard and play by the rules mantra, with many recognizing that systemic factors now make the American dream feel increasingly out of reach. In sum, the confluence of aggressive trade protectionism, restrictive immigration policies, escalating geopolitical conflicts, and the rapid, often unsettling advance of artificial intelligence paints a picture of a world in flux. The immediate future will likely see continued navigation of these complex dynamics. The July 9 tariff deadline looms, immigration crackdowns persist, and the ripple effects of international conflicts continue to reverberate. For Gen Z, the challenge will be to adapt and innovate within an economic and social framework that feels increasingly uncertain, leveraging new technologies like AI while grappling with their societal implications. The coming years will reveal whether the current disruptions are merely temporary turbulence or harbingers of a fundamentally reshaped global order. As the summer of 2025 unfolds, the United States finds itself navigating a complex confluence of escalating domestic unrest, unprecedented military deployments, and a stark redefinition of the armed forces' role, all under the scrutinizing gaze of a divided nation. From the streets of Los Angeles to the hallowed halls of military academies, a profound transformation of civil-military relations appears to be underway, sparking fervent debate and legal challenges that underscore a pivotal moment in American governance. The most immediate and visible manifestation of this shift is the deployment of U.S. Marines and National Guard troops to Los Angeles, a move that marks the first instance of Marines undertaking temporary detentions in the city. This federal intervention, which has seen approximately 4,000 National Guardsmen and 700 Marines dispatched to suppress widespread protests against immigration and customs enforcement ICE operations, has ignited a fierce legal battle between President Donald Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom. Newsom, alongside Attorney General Rob Bonta, has filed an emergency motion to block what they term the unlawful militarization of Los Angeles, arguing that the mission orders soldiers to engage in unlawful civilian law enforcement activities in communities across the region beyond just guarding federal buildings. Governor Newsom explicitly stated, "The federal government is now turning the military against American citizens. Sending trained warfighters onto the streets is unprecedented and threatens the very core of our democracy. Donald Trump is behaving like a tyrant, not a president." While a federal appeals court granted the Trump administration a temporary reprieve by delaying an order to return control of the National Guard to Newsom, the underlying tensions remain high. Reports indicate that while Title X forces are meant to protect federal personnel and property and do not do law enforcement functions, they are authorized to detain individuals in specific circumstances, such as preventing harm or interference, before transferring custody to civilian law enforcement. This fine line has already seen incidents, including the detention of former Spokane City Councilman Ben Stuckert during a protest against ICE, highlighting the contentious nature of these deployments. Concurrently, the Pentagon, under Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, is actively shaping the public perception and internal culture of the military as strategies seemingly aimed at addressing persistent recruitment shortfalls. A new pulse-pounding advertisement titled "Peace Through Strength," narrated by President Trump and Secretary Hegseth, explicitly touts an end to what they term wokeness within the armed forces. No more distraction, no more electric tanks, no more gender confusion, no more climate change worship. "We are laser-focused on our mission of warfighting," Hegseth declares in the ad, which features service members in intense training and combat scenarios. President Trump adds that military success will be measured not only by the battles we win but also by the wars we end, and promises to replenish the pride of our armed forces and the recruitment crisis. This messaging directly targets the recruitment challenges that have plagued the U.S. military in recent years. With the Army falling 25% short of its quota in 2022 and all major branches missing their objectives in 2023. The administration's belief is that rooting out these perceived distractions will bolster the appeal of military service, a theory that remains to be tested in the long term. Further underscoring the administration's intent to reshape the military's identity is the controversial military parade held today, marking both the 250th anniversary of the Continental Army and President Trump's birthday. Critics like former West Point philosophy professor Graham Parsons, who recently resigned in protest, view this event not as a celebration of military achievements but as a deeply concerning step towards politicizing the U.S. military and transforming it into a partisan and personal instrument of the president. Parsons, whose research on masculinity and war was effectively banned following an executive order prohibiting discussions of race and gender in military academy classrooms, argues that such actions violate the military's political neutrality. He warns that if service members and the public begin to perceive the military as a servant of a particular political faction, it threatens the institution's legitimacy and increases the risk of domestic conflict. The public's reaction to these developments remains deeply divided. A recent poll conducted by The Washington Post and the George Mason University Schar School of Policy and Government reveals that Americans are largely split on their support for the Los Angeles protests and President Trump's decision to deploy the National Guard and Marines. Californians, however, show greater support for the protests and significantly more opposition to the federal military presence. This divergence highlights the deep ideological fissures running through the nation, with the military increasingly positioned at the center of these domestic struggles. The intertwining of federal military deployment in domestic law enforcement, a culture war within the armed forces, and symbolic acts that blur the lines between national institution and political tool presents an unprecedented challenge to the traditional role and perceived neutrality of the U.S. military. As legal battles continue and recruitment efforts evolve, the long-term implications for civil-military relations, institutional trust, and the very fabric of American democracy will undoubtedly be a defining narrative in the years to come. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East has been dramatically reshaped in recent days, with a rapid escalation of hostilities between Israel and Iran throwing global diplomacy into disarray and potentially drawing the United States deeper into a volatile conflict. Despite former President Donald Trump's recent public commitment to a diplomatic resolution to the Iran nuclear issue just days ago on June 12, events on the ground have moved with alarming speed, suggesting that such aspirations are now, as the New York Times starkly puts it, in tatters. Within hours of Trump's diplomatic pronouncement, Israel launched a series of attacks on Iran, an aggressive move that CNN reported was the culmination of days of frantic diplomacy and dire warnings, epitomizing a "we fight or we die" mentality that seemingly left no room for de-escalation. The immediate aftermath saw Iran retaliate fiercely, unleashing waves of ballistic missile and drone strikes against Israeli cities. In turn, Israeli warplanes have pounded Tehran's air defense systems for a second consecutive night and critically have now struck Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordow and Isfahan, claiming significant damage, with the ominous warning of more attacks to come. The escalating tit-for-tat has already pulled the United States into the fray, with American forces actively assisting Israel in defending against the incoming missile attacks. The central question now gripping international observers is the extent to which Mr. Trump, a potential future leader, will be drawn further into this widening conflict. The Economist notes that America is already being dragged in deeper, and voices within the Republican Party are urging a more decisive stance. On June 13, Senator Lindsey Graham explicitly stated his strong belief that if diplomacy failed, it was in America's national security interest to go all in to help Israel finish the job. This sentiment contrasts sharply yet paradoxically aligns with Trump's own recent comments to Axios, where he suggested that Israel's attack could help me make a deal with Iran. This remarkable statement reveals a complex and potentially high-stakes approach, where the very act of military escalation is viewed through the lens of creating leverage for a future diplomatic outcome, however unlikely that may seem amidst the current conflagration. He further warned that future attacks could be even more brutal, underscoring the severe trajectory of the conflict. The root causes of this latest eruption are multifaceted. Israel has long expressed profound concerns over Iran's nuclear program, with some analysts suggesting that destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities has been a core obsession for figures like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, reportedly planning for at least 2 weeks of airstrikes. The veracity of Israel's claims regarding Iran's alleged race for nuclear weapons remains a point of contention, with The Economist noting grounds for doubt. Nevertheless, the perception of an imminent threat combined with a breakdown in diplomatic channels has undeniably fueled the current military actions. For Iran's regime, the situation presents a monumental challenge: how to retaliate effectively without inviting complete collapse, especially given what Israel and America are presenting as a stark choice: surrender or collapse. As the dust settles, or rather as the missiles continue to fly, the implications are profound. The stated goals of global diplomacy, particularly concerning the Iran nuclear issue, appear to be in tatters. The United States finds itself increasingly entangled, facing calls for deeper involvement, even as its potential future leadership offers a confounding mix of hawkish rhetoric and opportunistic diplomatic vision. The immediate future promises further volatility, with the Middle East teetering on the brink of a broader regional war and the international community left to grapple with the cascading consequences of a diplomatic failure that has rapidly escalated into a full-blown military crisis.